Theo, the state of society. Things aren't good. We're more addicted than ever. Men are getting weaker, and dopamine is running the show.
It does run the show.
So when we kicked off doing this next round of content, I thought, what's probably the thing that's going to have the most impact? I really thought with my life, it was vices and addiction and many other.
Yeah, it is a hot topic, that's for sure. You know? And a lot of people struggle with vices.
And I think it's one of those things that a lot of people understand it's a problem and they understand that they have a problem. Some people are completely oblivious to it. But then they don't really understand the nuance and the theory and more importantly what it reveals underneath.
Yeah.
So we'll go into addiction first. So what addiction is essentially a behavior or drug which is characterized by the 3 C's. We call them increased craving for whatever the cue is or the behavior of the drug, and having the loss of agency. So it means like losing control over the ability to be able to regulate that, which inherently causes negative consequences to yourself, to others, or both. So that's essentially what we define as an addiction. So the number one risk factor for addiction is easy access.
Yeah, we do live in a society that, we have an abundance of pleasurable experiences that we can attain, and that makes it very, very difficult for us. That's why when there's so much easy access to things, it's very, very hard also to essentially escape, because we are geared towards pleasure and avoid pain. So that makes it straight away so hard.
And you'll think even like these days, that whole accessibility to devices and addictive behaviors is just a whole nother level with technology.
Definitely.
Marketers, they're understanding this whole neuromodulation process, which is like completely messing us up. So
every company, first of all, like the way they create products, it's basically to hijack that system, where vice is essentially so up. So
the more they can get you hooked, profits are gonna.
That's it.
Profits gonna just make sense. So in terms of when we talk about risk factors, there's like 3 main general categories. There's nature, which is your genetics. That's stuff like epigenetics, what's handed down inherently from parents and even grandparents.
Yeah.
It's funny, even if your parent wasn't, for example, addicted to alcohol, but your grandfather was,
you can still pass on.
Yeah, you can actually still have that and have that susceptibility to it.
Of course.
So it's funny that it's 2 generations above. So that's more nature. Nurture is obviously the environment.
Yep.
That's from your parents, your upbringing, your trauma, stress, all that sort of stuff. And then the third one is neighborhood. That's where you live, which I think stress falls into that category.
Of course.
Whether there's poverty.
Yep.
Poverty is a big risk factor for addiction.
It makes massive difference, like growing up in a poor environment, like a neighborhood, compared to a rich one. You face a completely different situation.
Definitely.
And it's very, very hard to escape also, especially from behaviors like that when you grow up in poverty.
Yeah, and it's interesting that in terms of, doesn't matter what addiction it is, it's the same neurological pathway.
Yep.
With the brain. Whether you're addicted to work, you're addicted to coke, you're addicted to alcohol, porn, whatever it is, there's no specific pathway that each vice has a different pathway. It's the same pathway.
Same thing.
So essentially, it's funny how people judge someone for a particular addiction, but it's the outcomes, probably some of them are worse than others, but essentially the process is the exact same.
Of course.
And pleasure and pain are co-located in the same parts of the brain.
And it's a balance between the two. So every time essentially that you seek a pleasurable experience, and you have that experience, you basically tilt. I call it a seesaw essentially. So you tilt the seesaw in one side, but then it has to balance out and reach homeostasis again. So as you're coming out from the pleasurable experience and the effect that it has on that part of the brain, straight away we experience a small amount of pain, usually in the form of discomfort. And this is a thing that a lot of people are not aware of.
And it's funny how with that, no addiction starts severe.
Never.
You know,
Never.
with that, and they
It
all
creeps
start.
in.
Yeah, they all start small. They can come from an enjoyable place, and then with progressive narrowing, people get more and more addicted to that. They stop losing interest in other things, activities, even other probably vices they have, and they really narrow down to that one vice or that one addiction, and they get to a point where they used to have pleasure from that, and then they don't even get pleasure from that anymore.
Yeah, that's that we call it tolerance essentially. So what happens? They reach that level of tolerance, and they need a bigger amount of the substance of the behavior to get the same effect, and that's what happens. Then the pleasure response is actually shorter and weaker, but then the pain response that you get, the after effect from that, gets stronger and longer. So that creates a lot of pain. So the more you're going towards pleasure and you seek the experience, the more pain you experience also at the same time. And there's so many examples that we can bring.
Definitely. And that's the tricky part about it, and that's how it's a spectrum, and and it's not everyone is in the same state. People in different phases. There's different levels of addiction, and they all need to be measured and treated differently. So even it's funny with cross addiction, how once you develop an addiction to one particular vice, you're much more susceptible to others. So for example, with me, I started off, there's probably a few that are in the background, but for me, a big one, for example, work would be a big vice. And then through work...
so you mean workaholism?
Workaholism was a big vice. And then sex addiction, integrating to porn, more sex addiction was, they were probably my two vices. So through working a huge amount, basically what would happen is I would obviously get fatigued, and then I would have to have stimulants. Then you develop a vice to caffeine, energy drinks, that sort of thing. And then by the time you hit the end of the night, then you're so jacked up and your nervous system's just fried that then it's you need to downregulate. So how do you downregulate?
That's the hard
Either
part.
food, beating the maid, sex,
More vice.
any of these things. Yeah. So, and it's just a cycle that, from probably having some sex tendencies and workaholism, then from that, then a caffeine addiction arises, food addiction can arise.
Do you remember when that started for you?
In terms of the workaholism, I would have been 20, probably about 27.
Okay, so
28.
pretty late.
27, 28.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't hugely driven, sort of when I was younger. I just played a bit of sport, wasn't academically driven. Even my uni days, I wasn't massively driven. I was pretty fortunate to get a degree, to be honest. But yeah, so I was it wasn't probably until I got to my last year of chiro school that I thought, shit, all right, I got to pick up my work ethic and started increasing that. And even with business, that was something in the early days. When you look back in hindsight 13 years ago, you look at what you're doing then and you're like, it's a fucking joke. And it's a cakewalk. But at the time, you don't have the tools to be able to understand, understand things. But it really progressively built from there. But I think probably once I hit about a good 2-3 years in the business, then once I was seeing a lot of clients and then starting to hire staff.
This is where it spiked up everything.
Yeah. And had no cognitive awareness that work was a problem, that sex was a problem, porn was a problem, that energy drinks were a problem. I just thought,
So you basically were going hard on everything.
Everything.
Go hard or go home.
Exactly right. And I'm someone who is very, very wide for addiction as well. So someone like me has to be pretty susceptible. Otherwise I can get sort of caught in that loop. Yeah. So when you talk about vices and addiction, how do you sort of differentiate them?
Well, the thing is with addiction is I consider it a disorder, like a brain disorder. And it's characterized obviously by the compulsive behavior and the urge to seek a vice, essentially. And then the vice is actually the habit or the behavior which is considered morally or ethically harmful, to the individual first of all, but then it can be also to other people, So essentially, a vice most of the times leads to addiction.
It's and part of the addiction equation.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel the common denominator with both of them is actually dopamine. Definitely. So I feel this is the big problem, and this is also something that I feel even science is focusing a lot at the moment. You have a lot of books, written in regards to that. You have Andrew Huberman talks about that a lot, and other neurotransmitters in general. But also you have shows on the TV that really focus on that. because it goes back to the same thing. For a long time, we were completely unaware that companies or institutions and all that stuff really understand that reward pathway and dopamine, and they actually focus on that, how to hijack that, and basically get us addicted to the products or substances or anything else.
And that's pretty much only really been enhanced more with the phone.
Yeah.
They had to be a lot more crafty back in the day.
Yeah, think about that. We talk about this now, but probably the past 5 to 10 years, it has become actually the conversation has been happening a lot. But think about from the old day, even 70, 80 years ago, where Coke came, as a product out and all that stuff, which basically had cocaine inside, and you have all sorts of examples of other companies that essentially understood that and created products to hijack that system. But back then, the science hasn't caught up. Nobody really knew anything. So they made
morals back in the day.
No, so they essentially created all this problem, and they created a whole lot of industries, which expanded through the decades and created a massive problem also with us and trying to figure it out, which is very, very hard now.
And just taking it back to dopamine, because for some people they would have heard the word, but they don't really understand what it means. Dopamine is, firstly, it's a neurotransmitter that is involved predominantly with reward, motivation, movement.
Motivation to reward.
And a bit of pleasure. And a lot of it peaks, it's more around the anticipation of receiving that. It's to drive us. It's, of course. Evolution-wise, why we have dopamine is, when we needed to get food, so, and go hunt.
Yeah, and sex.
And sex.
Literally, reproduction, those two.
Definitely. So that would be the thing that would drive us to get food. Because, food is the sustenance that's fuel, but you need something to drive you to get that.
Of course.
And that's what dopamine is as well. And dopamine is a good thing. And our brains are really designed, they're more prehistoric.
Yeah.
They're not meant for these.
It's the anticipation is the problem that you mentioned, because we've lost that now. Because everything is so accessible and we don't even have any more anticipation, and it's all short term and instant pleasure. So we don't have that period that we're seeking actually to reach there. There's no more of that at all. It has gone out of the equation completely.
Yeah. There's still I think the anticipation in terms of all the cues and that sort of stuff. So there's still. I know what you mean. There's the delayed gratification.
The delayed gratification. This is where I was leading to.
Definitely. And and the thing these days is that dopamine, any way that you obtain a lot of dopamine without any effort isn't good.
And you know what? Okay, so I was actually reading the book Dopamine again, because I've read it probably a year ago, preparing for the podcast, and it was stating at some point that, for example, when you have meth or ice or cocaine or even Adderall, which is a prescription medication, it increases your dopamine by 1,000%. That's the spike that you are getting. Nicotine is 150. So, think about that. Sex is 100, for example.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. You literally have the production of 10 times the dopamine when you have certain drugs than actually having an orgasm during sex.
It's crazy.
It's wild. So imagine having that for the first time in your life, what it creates as an experience.
Of course, and you just look
and especially when you are in a lot of pain and you're seeking something and you have that experience, it's very hard afterwards.
And the degree that dopamine spikes is a direct correlation to and how fast it spikes, and the dosage is to how addictive something is. And based on what you said, meth, 1,000%.
Yeah.
How addictive is meth?
And think trying to reach to homeostasis afterwards, the pain that you are experiencing from that. That's why people, when they get their hit and at some point they don't have the resources to get it anymore, or their life has been very difficult and they start to experience the withdrawal symptoms, the pain and the discomfort that they experience is so dear that they will have to get it by any means. So it's very, very painful.
That's interesting. And in terms of when it's most powerful is not when things are predictable, it's when there's random intermittent reward. That's when because nothing was predictable back in the day.
No.
In ancient times, everything was random. You didn't know when you were going to get your next meal.
A lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, so that's obviously, it's an evolutionary
And
design.
we lived more like, we evolved more like that than what we are experiencing now. So we haven't caught up to the advancements that we are experiencing and the abundance also of the substances, of the pleasurable experiences, So everything happened so fast, we didn't have the opportunity to prepare ourselves. It's very, very...
I mean, evolution, you can't catch up in 200 years.
Nah.
Yeah, anything phones, that's like modern civilization's probably been a couple hundred years. And then you look at the tech, like civilization that's kicked off in the last like 10 years since social media, or 15 years, whatever. That's just a whole nother...
Yeah, and it's very interesting because I've actually reflected a lot upon that. And as we were having that conversation now, what was coming up for me was that the problem with dopamine is that the way we've structured everything moves so fast, and everything is related to dopamine. That's why we have actually a shortage of serotonin and problems with serotonin, because it's dopamine consistently. And it creates a massive problem, like in the brain chemistry, like in general. So and what I have found even with myself, because I've experienced that a lot, like I was consistently seeking pleasurable experiences and peaking, because you have to progressively actually experiencing more and more. And then I realized, like even for myself, I actually I don't tap into the serotonin system more, which is essentially the brake. That's how I like to describe it. So dopamine is your throttle and basically pushing the throttle so you can go forward. But then if you don't have at all the brake, you're just
done,
constantly like that. And what happens? You run out of petrol. That's the problem. That's why we really need to actually like focus on the balance at the same time, but at the same time also having the ability also to tap into the serotonin and the brake at the same time, because you will reach exhaustion and
definitely
and the deficit also, like the dopamine deficit.
And that's what I was going to go into a bit about that, how dopamine will always be getting produced at a tonic level. It's not saying it doesn't get produced and then it spikes and then goes to nothing. It's always got some mild tonic level getting produced, but it's different activities spike it. So go a bit more detail about the pleasure-pain balance and dopamine deficit.
Yeah. So as we mentioned before, obviously you have like every time that you experience like a pleasurable, like you have your substance or whatever your vice is, you get the pleasure response, and depending how much of that you had, the dosage or the amount or the spike that you get from each experience, then it has to go to homeostasis and you're experiencing that discomfort that we said. But because we avoid to go into that discomfort and experience the pain, we seek the pleasure consistently. So we're consistently pushing the button just towards one side. So this is where we're actually risking with the dopamine deficit state, the tolerance, and this is what creates essentially the problem. So there needs to be a balance in regards also and reaching that by seeking discomfort. It's a very, very important aspect. Allowing yourself to feel that discomfort, or even consciously, going towards discomfort in any way.
How can you do that?
Well, I can say how I've done it. Because,
how have you done it?
Because it's really interesting. Like for me, and especially preparing for the podcast, I was reflecting on my history and all the stuff, and I realized, especially because I had very, very painful experiences very, very young, from physical injuries to the biggest one that I had, the car accident that I've spoken before in the past, where it was such a shock to my system, like in such a big way, because we crashed with 140 kilometers. I wasn't wearing any seatbelt. There was no airbag. So essentially I absorbed the force from the crash of 140 kilometers on a wall, and basically my whole body absorbed all that. So the pain was so dear, I completely basically passed out, and I woke up, I can't remember even how many hours afterwards, inside the hospital. And then I passed out again and woke up the next day. So it was so traumatic, and the pain that I've experienced for the next probably 3 months, staying in the hospital for 12 days, having the surgery, waking up after the surgery in the cold room, freezing and shaking for hours until they got me and got me to basically to my bed. And even it was the emotional pain also, because as I woke up after the surgery, there was literally a bed outside of my room with a patient, actually another teenager. I was 16 back then. That guy must have been the same age. And as I'm looking outside my room, I see this guy screaming. And basically what has happened, he woke up from a surgery also, and he didn't have his leg. They had to amputate his leg. So literally, I've experienced so much in such a short period of time. And it was so intense that I started becoming like really familiar to pain. Plus also, and this is the other thing that I realized, everybody was trying to make me laugh at the hospital because I was in so much pain. So straight away, I was experiencing so much physical, psychological and emotional pain, but at the same time, I was laughing so hard. So later on in my life, as I started doing the inner work for myself, I realized I associated pain with pleasure. It was such an interesting thing for me, but I never thought of that at all. So later on in my life, I had periods of my life that I was actually seeking more pleasure and sometimes more pain. But essentially, I'm someone that through the last 2 decades, I've experienced extreme amounts of both. So it's a really interesting concept, but essentially for me, I seek that. The first one was through training at the gym. So I was going at the gym and I was literally trying to punish myself. I mean, punish myself. Like the pain that I was inflicting, it was self-inflicted. It was so dear. I remember going sometimes, leaving the gym, and I couldn't even walk outside. I was trying to destroy myself.
When you take yourself back to when you were in that state,
yeah.
What was your state at that point in time when you had no awareness of what was going on?
The best way to describe it is stuck. I was so stuck, and what I later realized through the work I've done, because my body was so contracted, I was so rigid, and there was so much tension, like nothing could flow. And especially I was trying to basically because I didn't have the tools also, or the understanding back then, I was trying to avoid going there. So this is what was gearing me up towards my vices. And basically I felt trapped inside my physiology, inside my body. I was so stuck that I couldn't do anything. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was reaching states of apathy also. I didn't have motivation essentially to try for something. So I've transitioned through all sorts of different things. It was very, very painful.
It's crazy.
Very painful. Plus the culture that I grew up in is so different from here. So back then, nobody really was talking about anything because I actually had pretty complex PTSD also from the traumatic experiences that I had. So that it was such a complex state that I was experiencing psychologically, but physiologically also. So yeah, I just couldn't see a way out, to put it really simple.
And if we take it back to that pleasure pain cycle, do you think where things are going in society now, that's led to anxiety, depression, and those rates?
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. We were talking about this before, how particularly in the younger generation, I haven't met a particularly a teenage girl, 12 to 17, who hasn't got anxiety. Literally, I haven't in the last 5 years, I haven't met one.
Yeah.
It's just like a spectrum. It's almost just a given that's the case. And I've thought, with all, particularly the youngsters, how much mental illness there is, whether it's they're becoming more aware of it? Are they labeling it? Is it actually the process of what's happening? Social media.
Social media, I believe, plays a massive role.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I believe it's just the hijacking of dopamine at such a critical age. I mean, you're neurologically, you're developing so much all the way up until 21, and you think they're getting hijacked with, vaping, getting hijacked with the phone use, and that's just constant, the drip of dopamine.
Yeah, constant stimulation also. And think about how we grew up, because we're pretty similar age. We never got exposed to those things, that young as we were growing up.
Yeah, and even think bullying.
Yeah,
bullying, at least at school, finished at school.
Yeah.
Or maybe on the way home,
Yeah.
So you've got that, you've got the way the dopamine system's getting hijacked, the expectations.
Of course.
Whereas we've only been exposed to that since
Yeah.
God, how,
And
10 years ago.
Yeah, and I feel parents also haven't caught up also to all that, because they're not, it happens now more and more, but I don't think they're educated enough to understand the impact that it has on their kids, just leaving them for a couple of hours with a screen in front of them from such a young age. I've seen some crazy stuff, like, like kids as young as 3 years old, like literally sitting for hours in front of a screen. Yeah, it's crazy. And yeah, it may be just a game, like it always, it's just a game, or it's just this and that. But the reality is the impact that it has on the brain's development and the dopamine system is very, very impactful.
Do you think it's lazy parenting?
100%. It's laziness, but at the same time, it's lack of education, and it's also extreme stressors that the parents are experiencing. Like, I understand also that part. A lot of parents, they try to make ends meet, and it's very, very hard to pay attention to their kid, because they can't even regulate themselves.
Of course. So there's so much more distractions for them these days, and stresses that they're just not as present.
Yeah, because even them, they will go a lot of the times to their vice to soothe themselves before they go to their kids.
Of course.
Because they're experiencing such intensity internally.
When we talk about cues, like cues are things that will activate a lot of dopamine, like the anticipation of the behavior or the drug or the reward. So like cues can be in the way of things, people, or places. Yeah. It's funny how, like, back in my day, the cue would have been if you're at a particular bar or particular nightclub, you know what I mean, or wherever it was, or you went to a festival or whatever it was, then it was almost like you knew. For me, it was more, women was such a vice, but then there's through alcohol and drugs, and they were all like package. There was like a package party deal they got done. But soon as it was like you went to a place and there was the music and the lighting, and that was all like the cue that my dopamine would have went. That was more from a place before even actually receiving, or a person could be a cue.
The peer group in specifically, especially for us men.
Of course.
I feel, a lot of the times we are celebrated for certain behaviors, or even vices, for example, like alcohol, or, even other substances.
I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
I was massively celebrated for by guys, and like in particular in my early 20s. And that's what led down and receiving a lot of love from men who are 23, 25, and that for certain behaviours of being a playboy, and the thing is, not till you get a bit older that then you,
of course,
realise the maturation process.
So do you feel that unconsciously also, sometimes probably like you were hanging out with the people so you can receive that?
Of course, absolutely, absolutely. Like my vehicle of receiving love from my dad was for achievement in sport, so that was something I had to be
plays up,
be, and that carries over into work and building businesses and things like that. And before I was aware, then the way I received love through men was from being successful in the party scene, and that was one of those things. And I got, you get celebrated, and you hang around like-minded guys, and
of course,
you know what I mean. So you get a very warped sense of what normality is, because you just choose to hang around people that engage in that behavior, and then you start thinking that's normal. It's like, it's not normal.
No.
Yeah, it's a part of life. Like a lot of guys, they go through it, and there's nothing wrong with it. It was good fun. You had some great experiences, but I guess it's
we all try to have some fun.
And I think I'd definitely say not to do it, but it's I guess how long you get caught in that world for, how long the damage is, how you view people, and how the respect that you have for yourself, and how that gets lost in that process, and for women and that sort of stuff. So I think that's something that I went through, which going into like the next, like I'd really like to go into some specific vices. Number one, like whether it's sex addiction or porn. This is one that's
a massive one for men.
And it's so common. That's something that I've obviously dealt with, and so many guys deal with it as well, and it's becoming more and more open, which is good. So from your perspective as doing healing work, supporting men, what do you sort of see in terms of how common it is, but also what it's hiding?
So I feel for us men, pornography especially has become, especially the last 20 years from when the internet came into our life, it has become like a big thing, because obviously it's so easily accessible. And a lot of guys, because obviously I work with a lot of people, and through conversations with friends, I've realized that we all start pretty early with this particular one. like my experience. Like I think the first time I watched pornography was 9 years old when I discovered my dad's cassettes, VHS, you know, like
I wasn't that lucky.
which was very, very random, but essentially like at that age, like having an experience like that, and I still remember it, like the pleasure that you experience from watching something like that for the first time, it's so intense. And then most likely you're gonna wire also your nervous system like through masturbation with that. So it's a whole continuation that happens. Like it's certain behaviors probably that cross how did you describe it before?
Cross addiction.
Cross addiction and all the stuff. It happens there. So for me it was pornography, masturbation, and then it's also like the ejaculation and the orgasmic effect that you get from that. So it's a cocktail, it's a recipe, you know, for pleasure, which you're experiencing a lot. So I feel after that, what happens through the accessibility of it and the massive pleasurable response that you have, you start to seek it more and more. And I feel shame is behind this a lot. Because obviously, like sexuality is such a taboo subject in a lot of ways, and I feel religion has played a big role also. And having those behaviors, for example, I remember still to this day watching pornography for the first time. It's you feel also like you want to hide. You know, it's almost like that you feel you're doing something wrong straight away.
Of course.
And doing that repeatedly with everything else, we're hiding, even through masturbation, through everything. And it creates a cycle that you keep repeating. So it's so hard also to basically.
It's funny even with studies how you view porn affects physiologically with yourself. For example, if you view porn as there's nothing wrong with it, it actually physiologically has a different effect to if you view it like you're a dirty little boy and with a lot of shame as well. So like even because that's just like another behavior that just compounds that shame cycle
consistently.
It's funny, like even with the effects of porn, how it primes you. I mean, you're watching two other people, or 3 or 4 or 5, whatever, having sex, and then whatever you're into, and then, but it actually more primes you for watching people having sex. Almost like it doesn't prime you for actually you having an interaction with someone, and it can actually even condition you to almost become like a voyeur.
And you're getting very conditioned, but at the same time, because we're talking about that tolerance and everything, you're consistently seeking more intense things to watch also. So after a certain point, like you're still so young, but the things that you're trying to watch becomes more and more consistently aggressive or intense, or you know, all sorts of things. And you reach at a point that essentially, and this is what I experienced myself also, I reached that state with pornography. I've watched so much, and I've tried to see such intense things that nothing was fazing me after a while.
Elaborate. We want to go deep today.
No, but essentially, like I feel you reach an anhedonic state essentially, and this is a big problem also. Like this is another thing that I wanted to mention. Anhedonia is actually something that men experience very, very common, and it has to do with the dopamine system also, because anhedonia essentially is the complete inability to basically experience pleasure. And this is what happens when you push the dopamine system so much, you reach to that state at some point. Your dopamine system is affected a lot, you have the deficit, and then you reach a state of anhedonia and you cannot feel.
There. Yeah, I've been there during COVID. I went there because you couldn't. I made a decision during COVID because this was before I was more consciously aware of a lot of things. And I made a decision: you can't travel, you can't go away. I just went all into work, cut my social life, and just like generated obviously more income than I've ever made in my life. And then because I went so isolated myself and worked so hard and just had this like self-punishment mentality, my workaholism went through the friggin' roof. My stimulant use went through the roof. My the sex addiction, and then I'd have to end up drinking heavily like once a week, going out just to like almost like reset myself in the most fucked up way. You know what I mean? And so all these things, and I remember I got to a phase where I was going so hard that I couldn't actually even experience joy.
Yeah.
And that's when I went, fuck, man, you got to like, really,
Did that push
really
it towards pornography also during that period?
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things. My pattern was the more I worked, they're like at a level where it was almost like overextended myself, and stimulant use was up. My nervous system would be so jacked up that also the fact that I wasn't going out socially, I had less interactions. I was more likely to go towards things like porn, or if I did go out,
of course,
sex addiction and that sort of stuff as well. So I hit a point where for me it was more not through. It's a combination of a lot of those things, but I got it more from overworking and stimulant use.
Yep.
And I hit that point where I was just like, fuck, man, I've got like no serotonin. And I was like that for a month, and I just said, that's it. You know, had the dial back work, had to like change a whole heap of things, reduce.
You had to make adjustments.
Yeah, 100%. Because I was having like, 3 energy drinks a day, and seeing a shitload of clients. I was working I was working 7 days a week. And, my mind was just like, you can't go away. You can't travel. Who knows what the fuck's going to happen with COVID? Let's just go all in, and I had that mentality, and that's all right for a bit. But then when I was like that for too long, I hit that state of, I couldn't experience joy. And I was just like, what the fuck? And you just felt like there was nothing.
Yeah, you feel empty.
Yeah, you feel empty. You feel empty. And
empty, numb, and
and I tell you what,
it's not a nice state.
No. And even though like I'd made more money than ever in my life during that period, but then I was the most miserable I've ever been in my life as well. So like it's one of those lessons that like I always draw back. And if I ever do sort of feel myself overextending, I can still be a little bit prone, not so much with the porn and the sex addiction and stuff, but more for me these days, it's more if I work too much and I'm not recovering and I isolate a bit, and then stimulant use can creep up, nowhere near to the levels it was. You can sort of start, I'm more consciously aware of it these days. But 100%, I went through that personally, and it's not fun.
Yeah.
And for someone to be like that consistently would be fucked.
Yeah. No, it's very, very, it's very interesting. And especially with someone driven, and having also like an ADHD brain, like, because you have such high capacity, your output is so high, everything that you do, you literally put like so much effort, and that's why you can really reach the exhaustion phase like pretty fast. I'm exactly the same with you.
Okay.
And the thing is also like with a lot of the vices and pornography, especially because we talk about pornography, what happens, the physiological effect, but also the effect in the brain, it's actually like one of probably the dearest ones that you can get. It's scientifically proven also that changes the altercations on the brain from chronic use of pornography and addiction. It has a massive impact in certain regions of the brain.
Like it reduces brain size, the right caudate part of the brain, which is involved with motivation. So the more porn you watch, the less motivated you are. Yeah, it's more distraction.
And to connect also with people in real life. That's the thing. That's why a lot of men, they just isolate themselves like in their room, and they don't have because it's so easy also, they don't have to put the effort. No
risk of rejection.
That's it. That's why like dating has changed so much, like especially the past 5-10 years, and men are experiencing massive problems because essentially they get taken over by this drug. And it's also the physiological effect because the nervous system gets affected massively. There's massive disconnection also that happens with our genitals, and a lot of men actually are experiencing also, they're so stimulated, and at the same time they can last also like for long, So there's a lot of problems definitely like with pornography. That's why I feel there is a big focus, especially the last couple of years. Like there's a lot of coaches out there, a lot of men that really, after sorting out their own addiction, really want to support men out.
Yeah, and we've done men's circles where, I mean, you actually, obviously, you do deep work healing with people. We've done men's circles where, like, you have 12 guys, at least 3, 4 will have like chronic massive porn use. Like as in where everyone will watch it, but like 3 or 4 guys that have an actual problem with it. And it affects their relationship. It's funny because I think it's multi-layered. Like the dating market these days is very geared towards, if you're in the top couple percent of guys, you get
like a high value man.
But I mean, but there's a reality with that as well. That like that's how society is gearing things. That a decent guy back in the day, he could get a decent girl. Like a decent guy these days, it's very difficult. When I mean decent, like average, like all right job, reasonably okay looking guy, okay shape, all those sort of whatever objective measures people use, which and I think that leaves the market as well. One's the accessibility of porn, obviously, but number two is so many of these guys, they're left there with nothing.
Of course.
And they might be average dudes. They're not even losers. I mean, some of them are losers. But but there's so many guys that are just there, and they're like the dating market's just not good for them. And they're sort of there, and what are they going to do? But what they can do is improve themselves and take responsibility and improve in areas and start to try and connect with the right people.
This is where you really need to have at least one friend that actually will confront you and will tell you the truth, and it will actually help you to break out of that. Because majority of men, we don't really actually have people around us, even as friends, that will do that. We're actually seeking friendships that just reinforce ourselves, so we can actually feel good. So it's very, very important to at least have someone that will really tell you the truth and really get you to see yourself.
And these guys are less likely to have those people around.
That's the other thing.
which compounds the problem.
And it's very, very hard. It's very hard.
And even like the amount of sexless men that haven't had sex in a year.
For a long time.
That has tripled from 2008 to 2018.
Yep.
Tripled. You look at things like how testosterone dropped by about 50% or something. In the last even 20 years ago, I think the average 60-year-old would have the same as a guy in his 20s.
But see that you mentioned testosterone, and this is the funny thing. Testosterone and dopamine are the main hormone and neurotransmitters that actually affect your libido, and we have massive problem in both. That's why there's massive problems with erectile dysfunction and all sorts of other conditions that men experience, like with sexuality.
Yeah, and when you cut the cord, what gets released? Prolactin. Yeah. What's prolactin do? Plummets testosterone and dopamine.
Yeah.
And if you're doing that all the time,
of course,
you can sort of see that. And then
plus you deplete yourself also.
Yeah, and I think that's something you just constantly deplete yourself. Your motivation, everything's gonna and then it reinforces shame cycles, and people they feel like they can not get engaged in relationships with people because they think they get that from porn, which they don't.
From my imaginary friend. It's pretty crazy.
In terms of like porn and really getting on top of it and managing it, generally most people have a ritual. There'll be, I know I definitely had a ritual when I looked up. I looked up on this. There's either position, time, location.
Yep.
So they're the three things. So for me, time is generally going to be, is it first thing when you wake up? Is it when you go to bed? Location, is it on your bed? Is it on the couch? Is it in the shower? Is it, is it in a certain
What's your go-to?
place?
Yeah.
What's your go-to? Yeah. And even I thought what an interesting one was, and it was bang on with me, is position.
Yep.
Because some people might be standing, other people might be laying supine on their back. And then when I first came across this, I was like, fucking spot on. Like I knew my exact time, my exact place, and my exact position.
And probably that duration was also like the same probably every time.
It's always short, yeah.
It becomes a habitual thing. That's a reality.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that, like, in terms of really managing it, that's an empowering thing if you can understand your ritual. Because you can then start changing those things.
Yeah, that's why the environment is so important, to make some changes on the environment and remove the accessibility, the easy accessibility of it.
What do you recommend for your clients as like a strategy when you take them through a process and they come to you and then they understand porn or sex addiction is a problem? Let's go with porn. Yeah, it's slightly different.
Well,
how would you take them through that process of improving that?
For me, the first thing is actually abstinence. That's how I'm testing someone in the beginning, is basically to go through an abstinence period of at least 3 weeks.
And how do you get them to do that?
Well, in the beginning, obviously, we have the conversation and I explain to them why and what they can actually experience, because the reasoning behind it is especially for the first week, I really want to see, and this is what I actually explain them to do. I'm trying to see what comes up from not going towards that vice. Because this is what straight away will happen. When you don't go to your vice, to pornography in this situation, you're gonna have a feeling that is gonna come up, or in general that discomfort, and I really wanna see what is gonna come up for them, but at the same time, I wanna see how they connect with it, and also if they can connect with it. Because in the beginning, when you do something for such a long period of time, and you're not connecting with what's hiding behind it, and you're disconnected, especially from your physiology, it's very, very hard in the beginning to even notice.
What do you mean connecting with it? Like when you're connecting with what comes up?
Yeah, so essentially when you remove the substance or the behavior, the emotion that's hiding behind is gonna come up. And it's gonna be wanting to express. So it's gonna be like a form of anxiety, it's gonna be like an emotion, it may be anger, it may be shame, it may be all sorts of things. So I really wanna make the individual go there.
And probably journaling.
Yeah.
A good vehicle.
Through journaling, so through trying in the beginning to having a small practice, even if it's 5-10 minutes in the beginning, 15 minutes, of just sitting with that. Like allowing themselves to be present and not try to distract themselves somewhere else. Don't watch TV, don't try to actually replace that vice with something different, but just be with yourself.
Which is very difficult.
Which is very, very difficult. Every single client that I have, like a man, even older guys, man, like the question that I ask, how do you feel? Do you feel comfortable or during the week at all, or even the weekend, do you spend any time just by yourself without doing anything? It's always a no. And they've never actually thought about it. But when you ask them, they actually reflect back and and it just hits them. Oh, actually, I don't do that. Because they think actually spending time with themselves is actually watching TV. Or even having a cigarette. Or
it's downtime.
Yeah, downtime.
Yeah.
Or masturbating.
Yeah.
Which is not. Have you allowed yourself to actually sit in silence, and allow yourself to be there?
Or someone who's a workaholic would, like myself, how I viewed it would be you being unproductive.
Yeah, even when we had the conversations and all that stuff in the beginning, like when we started working together, it was the same thing.
Yeah, and I feel it's worth investigating. If you're, and I hear it all the time with people, they go, oh, I can't just not do anything. I go crazy if I don't do anything. You're like, that's worth investigating. Because that means that's like, oh, you've got to keep busy. It's male and females. I find a lot of women in particular, they have to be...
Of course,
on the go. You know what I mean? So it's males and females. We distract ourselves in different ways.
But the whole purpose of abstinence is actually to get exposed to all that, so you can actually start connecting with everything. Because otherwise, it's going to be very, very difficult to essentially work on that and change the behavior or progress or progressively reducing the amount, so essentially you can remove it. You're not going to be able to do it if you don't connect with what's hiding behind, and what leads you essentially there.
I think a big one as well is if you do relapse, call it relapse in that period, is like accept it's fine, and then get back on the...
Okay, this is where accountability with compassion is very, very important. Because most of us, we have been shamed through society, through parents, through friends for doing a certain thing. And a lot of the times it will be a vice, it will be a behavior or something like that. So actually having someone that will actually provide you the accountability, but with compassion and not shaming you, it's very, very important, because it allows you to start rewiring, those pathways and actually thinking, okay, it's not that bad. I'm not going to be shamed, and you're going to start feeling a bit safer, to go through that. So remember, even with you, when we started and I told you to abstain from certain things, I wanted to see in the beginning how much you're going to last. So that's the thing. Yeah, we say 3 weeks, but there's no pressure for you to meet that. In the beginning, it's all about actually seeing how much you can last without getting there.
And what comes up.
Yeah, and you also staying honest. Because a lot of men, even when you go through a process like that, they will tell you, I lasted 3 weeks, but the reality is not. So if you're not honest and you don't actually stay accountable, you're not going to be able to succeed. So it's very, very important to go through a process like that.
when we go through vices, things like, porn, alcohol, coke, meth,
cannabis,
all these things, like I sort of put them into 3 categories. There's obvious, which is those ones I just mentioned. There's subtle, like the phone.
Yep.
Because subtle things are things you sort of know, you probably waste a bit of time on them, but you don't think they're a really big problem. But they actually are a much bigger problem than what you realize. And then the other category is celebrated. That's
the dangerous one.
That's the dangerous one.
Yep.
That's the workaholics, the fitness freaks, which is a very nuanced, fitness is a very nuanced one. People overindulge in personal development and doing courses and upskilling.
What's your take on that?
On personal development
specifically?
Yeah, because I've obviously done a lot over the years, being in business for many years and being a chiropractor, we naturally gravitate into towards that. So I've had like both of those, my career and the fact I've been in business, that's pushed me there. Look, I think it's an essential process of like coaching, upskilling, personal development. It's a essential process of growing and developing, and it accelerates that process. But you get these people that you fucking meet, and they're like personal development junkies.
Yep.
And the biggest thing is there's no integration. It's like someone who reads all these books and they do all these courses. They go to Tony Robbins. What they're getting addicted to is the high of being around other people and like the novelty and the stimulation. And look, that's great. But the thing is, generally, a lot of these people, they're spending a shitload of money doing all these
for advice.
For advice. And the thing is, most of the time they're not in the position because they're not successful business people.
Yeah. And you see them, they're still on the same level a lot of the times that they actually started. And this is the thing that you said about integration. They're just addicted to that dopamine hit that they get and the reward from just being in that environment. Yeah. Because this is the trick, man. Especially a lot of the, like Tony Robbins and all of them, all the stuff, they create such massive events, and you see there's music, there's movement, there's
a lot of energy there.
There's so much hype. They do all sorts of things. And
have you been to one? Have you been to one of his?
Not Tony Robbins, but I've done personal development courses and all that stuff.
4-day one, it's ridiculous.
It's wild, but you get such a massive high.
Of course.
And you've seen it probably yourself. You go from this massive high, being around so much energy, your dopamine system is firing up so much, and then you get out of that and straight away you fucking plummet.
Because what happens? You go back into life.
That's the thing. And everything has to reach the balance again.
And generally these people have no productive habits to have their life in order. They normally don't normally have their life in order. So they don't have their life in order to then start to integrate and slowly, so that over 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, you go, holy shit, this person's actually taken this stuff on board. Whereas you go to a Tony Robbins, I went to the one, that was probably like 8-9 years ago. Look, it was good, but it was ridiculous.
Of course there's value,
There's like 10,000 people there. I mean, he's amazing at what he does. But I mean, that's a very general crowd. And he does well, that's 10,000 people and all sorts of people there. But like, you're jumping around like fucking idiots. And these people, if you spoke to them 3 months later, 6 months later, there'd be 95% of people would have no integration. They just had an experience. Like as if you went to a bloody concert or you went to a festival. It's the same. It's like and you got to think, that's fine, but when you're spending, $2,000, $3,000, and people who get truly addicted to a lot of all these, personal development courses, how it is. They're not cheap.
No.
And there's a lot of like time, there's a lot of money, and these people generally aren't in that position to be able to afford that sort of stuff. Which goes into that's the negative consequence. It's all right if you're spending money and you've got the money and you're upskilling, and even if you're spending quite a bit on, but you got to integrate it. So then there's a positive consequence.
Of course. It's application of knowledge essentially. And this is what happens, because essentially most of the courses that you have out there, they all talk about most of the times the same thing. So essentially, these people go course after course after course. They haven't applied anything, and they just keep repeating most of the time
and
the
just
same
putting
thing.
their own little spin.
Because they go to a different facilitator or a different course, they're thinking they're getting something. Something different.
It's because it's just a bunch of people. They think they're all growth mindset. And look, there's a lot of people. They genuinely are looking to get better. The thing is, some of these people, they're getting hooked on all the neurochemistry as opposed to...
That's why it's very important to understand that everything can become a vice.
100%.
Everything.
Have you seen that in fitness?
That's another big one.
All right, go on there. Because that's a very a celebrated one. Work and fitness as well. And most people who are addicted to fitness wouldn't think they're addicted to fitness.
Nah.
They think I'm just dedicated.
Hashtag dedicated.
Yeah.
Fitness is another interesting one. This is something that I'm also guilty about it and all that stuff, because at some point I was like that until I actually realized that it was one of my vices. And it's really interesting because it just hit me one day. I actually realized for probably 15 to 20 years, I was just addicted to the heat, and I was progressively trying to find different ways to get it. And
so how would you define, or how did you know in hindsight you're addicted to it as opposed to someone who's just committed and trains hard, and you know what I mean?
First of all, you need to see actually what impact it has on your life. So for me, my nervous system was cooked. Like I was for a long time like that, because obviously the traumatic experiences I had and the way I lived, especially in my 20s, being in the state I was, like I pushed so hard and my nervous system, I completely destroyed it. So I had to recover from that. But essentially, this is what I wasn't realizing, because fitness is supposed to be something that it has a good impact on your health, on the way you look and all sorts of things. For me, it actually had the opposite effect, because I was overworking. I was in relationships that I had stepkids. And in general, my output was so high. And then I was going at the same time to the gym, like doing CrossFit or all sorts of other fitness ventures that I engaged with. And the effect it has, it was actually the opposite. My sleep suffered. I wasn't recovering. I wasn't noticing any difference on my body. Actually, probably even the opposite, because my cortisol was through the roof. So that's the thing. And it was actually detrimental to how I was feeling. So yeah, I was getting fitter and I was feeling like, obviously, like better in that sense, but essentially had a bad effect on my life, even in my relationship, and essentially I was hiding there.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like, because if you're actually like a professional athlete, it's hard because you sort of have to go there to a degree.
It's another thing. Being a professional athlete, that's your life.
Yeah,
you're training because that's your profession. Like it's a completely different story. Yeah. But there's so many people that they have families, they have kids. You know, like they have so many stressors in their life, and they go there, which provides a relief also at the same time. You get that dopamine hit also, but depending also what style of activity you choose, it's going to have a completely different effect. And for a lot of people, they don't understand that they just get addicted to this thing. You know, for both of us, because we've been a part of the CrossFit community, for example, the whole community, it's almost like an archetype. They will train 5-6 days a week, which a lot of the times, and most of the CrossFit gym, it's the training is so intense, partying on the weekend, and then just keep repeating that. It's this cycle consistently. And then when you look the effect that it has on their lives, and not just in the personal level, but even in relationship, I've seen so many situations that they're pretty.
And the one time I think I got addicted to fitness, I mean, I've always valued fitness and train. I mean, I train in the gym 6 times a week, do jiu-jitsu 3 times a week at the moment, which is high. But the thing is, it's very managed. You know, it's not overtraining, even though it sounds to most people like it probably. But the thing is, it hasn't got a negative effect with other aspects. And if I felt like it was affecting my energy or other things I'm trying to work on, I would cut it off. But in 2018, when I came out of a relationship, I remember I needed, which I thought was going to be, I needed a bit of grounding, and I went hard into fitness, which I think was a good starting point. But then I went from being in pretty shit shape to like training twice a day. That's when I started doing CrossFit. I was doing jiu-jitsu.
This is where we met even.
Yeah, that's where we met.
We're both on the same state.
Yeah. That's why I'm saying that. So that got me into CrossFit, and then obviously I got to a level where I was probably 94 kilos, and I went down to like 86, 85, but just shredded. You know what I mean? And I was in that mindset of, I was using fitness as an escapism. Initially, it was like, it was an escapism initially, which was fine, but then it didn't get dialed back. And it became like and I was getting positive reinforcement for just being in shape and being, you know what I mean? And other aspects of my life were definitely getting neglected. And I fell into that cycle of 5-6 days a week, just train like an animal and then just party fucking hard on a Saturday night. And then Sunday you fucked, repeat the cycle. So I was exactly in that situation years ago. And I was like that for a good 12 months as well. And there's a lot of collateral damage when you're like that. And people look at you and go, oh, fuck, you're healthy, you're fit. It's like, nah.
No, but that's the thing, because we are getting a massive dopamine hit there. There's loud music. The style of training is so intense, and it creates like such a massive like dopamine production.
And my stimulant use was out of control.
There's the stimulants, and this is an interesting one, because while you're doing such an intense activity, there's other things that come into play. The stimulants, and the partying, like all sorts of things. That's why like a lot of people, they don't actually reflect on what they're getting from that. And is it a healthy thing, or it actually becomes a vice? You know, because it can be one or the other.
Definitely. We touched on phone use as a vice, and I think that's more like a subtle vice, not a obvious, definitely not a celebrated vice. It's somewhere in the middle, and it almost more than a vice. A phone turns into more like OCD.
Yeah.
Because the obsession is the thought, the compulsion is the act, and you think it's more in that category, more than a vice. Because we're getting to a level now that people just feel uncomfortable, you know, if they're not looking at their phone. We're looking at our phone over 200 times a day, which is fucking wild. And I've got a theory as well. So I've got to, you know how
talk to me about your theory.
I've got a theory. So you know how we all say, fuck, like another year's gone by. Life's gone so quickly. And I'm like, the last 5 years, have gone so quickly. And like, I was just going, what is it? Obviously, as you get older, every year's a smaller percentage of your life. Yeah, I get it. You know, we've got more things on our plate these days. I get it. But I'm like, man, I really think it's phone use time. And we're constantly in such a distracted state, because you have, you know, the average person's, you know, they're probably spending 2 hours minimum a day on their phone. And if you said the average person that, you know, you ask people,
that's good if it's only 2 hours.
Of course, exactly right. Like 2, and then you add in things like, you know, Netflix and video games and other distractive. But even if you just look at the phone, you know, people probably on the phone 2 to 3 hours a day. And most people, you go, ask them how they go, oh, it's just stressed, just busy. It's busy. Everything's just so busy. It's like, get off your fucking phone.
So
you know, imagine like get a widget, have a look at it and see how much time you're spending. If you weren't on your phone, even if you were just on your phone 20 minutes a day, you know what I mean? And think if you had an extra 2 to 3 hours a day, like where you're present and you can do other things, your days would feel longer.
But I don't want to sit with myself.
It's just too painful.
That's the problem, man.
Yeah, exactly.
And because it's there for us, and we're gonna go straight away. I don't want to feel this.
Yeah, and the big thing with phone is it's a massive accelerant for all the other vices. You know, like. Years ago, I mean, you had to go through your dad's porn stash to the porn was now.
He got me good.
Yeah, he did. Fuck, I should have been brought up in Greece as well. I wasn't. No, I didn't get that sort of.
Thanks,
flavor,
Dad.
but, cheers, Dad. Yeah, but like, I mean, you got gambling you can access now. I mean, you could always access gambling other ways, but like, it's the accessibility. Goes back to number one thing is accessibility. Yeah. If you had a big bowl of Coke here and you could just sleep with whatever your woman you had, and you had meth there, like, can you imagine how much, like, you know, the same way we access Instagram or TikTok, if you got access to sex, drugs, like, you know, like you turn into Charlie Sheen. See how that went for him? You know, but essentially that's what happened.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what stops, you know, most people from getting that level. It's not that, or not most people, like a lot of people, it's just the accessibility. If people had like more money and more access to it, you know, it'd be scary. But the things like the phone creates that accessibility to so many other vices, which is nuts. But and it's really like, you know, when you're having a diet, like we all talk about, like, you know, you don't want to eat processed food, you want to eat well, but there's a content diet. As well, and being mindful of like what content you're putting into your
what you consume.
Brain. Because I think a lot of it's processed, like processed shit. And so many people, if they're not mindful of And it happens to all of us. We might start following different people, and you go, "What the fuck am I following this person for?" You know, and being one, mindful of your phone time use, but secondly, like who you're actually following. And if it's not productive and generative, it's not good for you.
Nah. And as you were saying that, I remember because you said about the content we consume, and that's the thing, it's overstimulation, so much information consistently, and we don't really allow our brains to properly like actually process what we put in. And what came up for me was actually one of the self-imposed stressors, like the hormetic response that we talk about, which we can expand a bit on, that I'm experiencing with a specific way. So basically there is this drops that I have, which is called, it's a medicine from the Amazon also, and there's drops from a tree in the Amazon, and essentially they use it as a medicine down there, and you put them in your eyes, and as you open them in the corners here, and as you open them, it gets dispersed all over like your retinas and everything, and it literally burns like lava in your eyes. It's intense. But what that does, and the way they use it in the Amazon, it's basically to clear your visual cortex, to give you the clarity. And actually, if you have been watching a lot of porn or a lot of content or getting overstimulated, to actually create that peace and stillness inside your mind.
And we've done that together.
And we've done it together
and it
also.
Fucking burns.
It burns, but that pain though,
yeah,
it's.
But you do definitely feel different clarity, particularly the next day.
Yes,
after doing that,
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
I didn't get it straight away because we were doing other stuff.
You need a lot of drops to get there.
Got a few handy.
My poor eyes.
Yeah, exactly right. But like, I definitely noticed my clarity of thought was a lot better after that as well.
Yeah.
It's funny how with phones, the companies have essentially turned human connection into a drug.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is nuts. And do you have any sort of, in terms of like managing things, I guess people just phone use has really made us like a lot more susceptible to be bored, and like because we're just constantly overstimulated. So with boredom, what are people don't like being bored. Is this something that you encourage for your clients?
Well, this is something that I still struggle myself. Yeah. and it's a big thing, like actually allowing yourself to feel bored. For me, probably my last frontier, it's actually the phone usage. This is the one that I still try to work on. And I have periods of time that obviously it becomes back a vice. I abstain a bit, but then it goes back. I go back to that. So I'm still trying to figure out that for myself. And for me, it's actually like not allowing myself to feel bored. So it's actually a really big one.
It's tough.
It's very tough.
I find it very difficult.
Because we're so overstimulated, and especially some of us, because we've engaged with so many things. Our lives are so intense in a lot of ways, and we push so hard. It's very, very different when you have conditioned your system like that, and your physiology and your nervous system to constantly do things to just allow yourself to feel bored. So I literally have to, at points, remind myself, and this is where it happens for me. For me, it will happen when I feel exhausted. When I'm in the end of my cycle of pushing really hard and I will start feeling off, it's a reminder for me. And I'm like, oh, straight away, I'm here back again. And I have to allow myself to feel bored. I need to allow myself to feel exhausted. And I will take a couple or 3 days to really allow my system to recover.
How do you convey that to, say, like a busy mum or a guy with a business who's like very...
Yeah,
schedule is pretty tight, especially if he's got a family.
Yeah. So this is the hard thing. Like obviously every individual and every situation is different in that context. But like a mom, for example, a single mom with a young kid, a young baby, it's very, very hard. So there has to be a period, obviously, for the kid to be old enough so you can get a bit of time to even go there. But essentially, like for a family, there needs to be a lot of communication between the partners, and periods of time that one goes and stays present and allow themselves to rest and go there, which means no screens, no TV, literally disengaging from everything. and allowing yourself just to sit and feel bored. Because this is when the brain also gets the opportunity to actually process things. Most people, and that's a big thing even throughout history, especially back then, like with Einstein and everyone, they have shared with the world that basically this is where all the good ideas came to them, when they allowed themselves to be bored. But nowadays it has become almost impossible,
Of course.
because of all the avenues that we have. So yeah,
no, pondering life, reflecting on your own life, what sort of life you should live. I mean, you don't even worry about them when you're just caught in the rat race.
Of course.
Spinning the wheel. In terms of like sleep tips, I've got like a bunch of things I'll go through in terms of what can really help with people. So, couple of things. Definitely, number one, when you're sleeping, this is something I've found really helps. Phone outside your room.
Mm-hmm.
It legitimately makes a difference. I have done it. I've been aware of this, and then I've not done it for too long. And then whenever I take it out and put it in my ensuite, literally I sleep so much better. Yeah. Whether it be from the EMF or just I've got this subconscious awareness that it's there, it makes a difference.
It's everything.
Another one, having definitely not looking at the phone in the morning and doing whatever it is, whether it's 60 minutes or 30 minutes or just a period of time that you allow yourself to settle in before you start looking at your phone. Obviously, at the end of a day, having a hard block time that you just don't look at it. Mm-hmm. And it's good to have a behavior that precedes that. For example, whether it's, okay, I'm not going to look at the phone I want to go to bed at 9:30, 10. I'm not going to look at my phone from 8:30 onwards. So it's like, okay, when I have a shower at 8:30, the phone's done. Or if you do journaling then, or you do whatever you do, you cook for the next day, whatever you do, you have some behavior that precedes that. Once it's done, it's done. Another one, there's a study basically showing if there's an area of the brain called the habenula. So basically, if you're looking at light off a phone from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m., basically that will activate a pro-depressive and disappointment state as well. So that's one of these things when you get up in the night, looking at your phone and you're just scrolling, you go to the toilet, get up and you're looking at your phone, you get stuck on it for 30 minutes. That we've all been there. And then how do you feel the next day?
Oh,
absolute dog shit. Yep. Yeah. And that's something that affects a part of the brain. When you're working, have the phone away from the table. Just put it away. The further away you can have it, because when things get difficult, what are we going to do?
Straight away.
Straight to the phone. Things like logging out of apps, that actually really helps as well. I found when I was just looking at because for me, I don't look at like TikTok. I've got a team that runs that, but like I'll look at my Instagram. I don't really look at my WhatsApp, so I'll look at that. So when that's been an issue, I literally go like remove the app. So if I want to look at it, I've got to fucking go to the app store, redo it. And what you're doing is creating friction, which helps with that. So that's something I've found it's been pretty good. Installing a widget into your phone and looking at that so you actually can objectively see how much you're looking at your phone, because everyone would definitely underplay it.
Oh yeah, very, very important.
If someone looks at their phone 200 times, if you ask them, how many times a day do you look at the phone? Oh, 10, 15. Like that, no one would go, 50. You know what I mean? And how long do you think you can spend on your phone? Oh, probably like half hour a day. Boom, 3.5
we really
hours.
Underestimate
that. They grossly underestimate it. So turning off notifications, having out of reach, even creating friction by, this one's a bit ridiculous, but like you might only use your phone when you're standing. Like don't allow yourself to like get on the couch, be in a nice comfortable position, because as soon as you're in a comfortable position and you're on your phone, what are you going to do? You ain't going to move. So just little things that you can do. You can have like a Sabbath day that you just don't look at your phone. People worried, what happens if someone needs to get in contact with me? No one needs to get in contact with me.
Nobody's going to die, mate.
No one's going to die. You ain't going to do shit. The ones that matter, I'm sure you can tell them where you're going to be that day. Everyone else, they'll be fine. So there's definitely a lot of those things, and they're all things I've definitely done myself, and I've known every single one of those things actually makes a positive impact. So like those 10 things that you can do, if you can actually start doing them, I know it's a bit overwhelmed, that massively affects and helps as well.
Definitely.
The next vice I'd like to talk about is workaholism. This is me. This is me. So when we think of where do you think workaholism comes from?
Feeling not enough. And obviously it starts from childhood, the way we experience, childhood and especially the way we've been parented a lot of the times, in order to feel loved, we had to do a certain thing, you know? And so when you're conditioned like that, obviously growing up, you're gonna try to achieve things and get the love.
I agree.
And especially for us men, usually will be our dad,
100%.
especially from our cultures.
100%.
You know? That's what happened for me, and I believe like the same with you.
And I think there's low self-worth that drives it, and need for approval. And you know, and pain's an amazing driver. And pain's good to create the activation energy, but pain's not a good thing to be doing for decades as well. Because the thing is as well, if it's coming from that place of low self-worth, and guys who do and low self-worth, you can have a lot of money and still have low self-worth. And that's what you could be fit, do well with, you know, all objective markers, and then think, oh, but I'm fucking killing it. And I used to always think, oh no, I'm good. I would, if someone said to me 3 years ago, oh, like a lot of what your drive is based off low self-worth, I'd go, you're fucking ridiculous. I'm just driven. I'm doing all right. I'm all good. It's like, until you actually
There's
really...
evidence there.
Exactly right. And it's all external. It's all like the external validation things that we look for. And the problem with that is if low self-worth is what drives you, no matter how hard, no matter how successful, it's not going to change it.
You will never be enough, man. And then this is the problem. That's why at some point you will have to actually question your drivers. What actually what gives you that drive? Because in the beginning, obviously it's going to be good. That pain that you're experiencing inside, it's going to drive you to succeed and acquire things. And a lot of them are going to be good also. But if you don't investigate after a certain point, because when you're reaching and nothing is enough, you know, and you become greedy in a lot of ways, plus also you're pushing so hard that it has a negative impact on your health and the relationships in your life. Because if you're succeeding, you know, through that and everything around you is falling apart,
100%.
That's not a good thing. 100%. So at some point you will have to look yourself in the mirror and say, okay, is it a good thing? Where does it come from? Do I need to change something? And usually for men, it will require a massive crisis to finally look at it. You know, either reaching bankruptcy or a health issue, like a manifestation of disease. It can be a lot of different things. But we wait for that massive crisis to essentially get ourselves to look at it.
Of course.
It's interesting.
Men don't take the subtle cues.
Nah.
We don't. Nah. We need the big slap in the face. And for me, I think when I reflected, it's like if your stress levels are out of control, your energy's going down, your health's getting affected. And I use work definitely as a vehicle of not engaging in intimate relationships. You know what I mean? And if it does start affecting, even now when I look at it, I've got to, because I'm definitely not like fixed and on top of it, and you know, because I'm doing so much at the moment, and I've got such a big purpose and mission. I've got to be very mindful of like not overstepping that boundary as well, and then delineating between, okay, what's healthy work ethic and doing the right things to work towards your mission and your goal, and what's when that creeps into low self-worth, pain. And it does, like, even though there's an awareness of it, it can transition in an unhealthy way. I think for me, when relationships are getting affected, and I mean with me it's more I'm not nurturing them enough. I just focus on work, and maybe focus on work and fitness, and everything else just doesn't fall apart, but they're like, if I do it for long enough, it will fall apart. Yeah. And you got to be mindful of, you know, your energy, your health, your stress, all those sort of things. And as I said, like, there's not a lot of guys who they think everything's going great, but then you see these other aspects of their particular relationships, and it's just a shit show. What
about a relationship with yourself, though?
You went there.
This is
the most important. And I think a lot of it is, for me, there was no self-compassion. And that's something I'm still working on, is self-compassion, because I was brought up pretty tough, conditional love, only given love for achievement. And self-compassion is, for me, is the vehicle of like, and that allows you to be bored, allows you to not do as much, not be as productive. You know what I mean? And actually be okay with it. Because the thing is, you don't have to keep pushing and grinding. There's very, very, very few people that are in that cat. Like, there's times, some people, I get it, but most people, no. You know, if you're doing things consistently in the right way and you've got a good engine and good work ethic, we often tell ourselves a bullshit story that we need to be doing all this extra stuff. And if we evaluate what we're actually doing, most of it's not high quality work when you get to that point.
And everything needs to be achieved fast and in a short period amount of time, but it's actually the long game. And people need to allow themselves to actually enjoy that journey and the process instead of consistently focusing in the end goal and, just getting there. Have fun.
Definitely. And starting with, like, a lot of it's about authenticity, understanding yourself, undoing the veil.
That's why it's all that relationship with yourself. And this is actually a good podcast also, like, that we can do later on. What's the difference between personal development and proper inner work? Because there is massive.
What would you say?
So I would love. I don't want to expand now, but I will say some simple difference. Essentially, personal development, it's mostly associated with the ego identity, because you are actually developing that. It's all about upskilling, creating wealth, this and this. So basically, it's all about the egoic identity. Where you're actually doing inner work, it's all about going much, much deeper. And there's nothing wrong with that either. Yes, it can become a vice, like the personal development. Spirituality can become a vice. Inner work can become a vice. Everything can become a vice. But essentially, it's really understanding that, yes, you do need to develop your ego identity and all the aspects of it, so you can actually succeed and interact with the external environment. But if you don't have the foundation and the depth with the inner work, and that's the other thing, there's a difference between depth and growth. That's a massive one. So essentially, the inner work, there's a lot of different components, and it really helps you understand your psyche properly, your soul, like, and connect with deeper parts of yourself.
Would you say the inner work's more depth, personal development,
and
growth?
foundation,
personal development's more growth, and when you explained that to me, I really, it resonated a lot with me, because I'd done so much personal development, so I always had such a good engine for growth. But as you said, if you haven't done the depth to catch up to the growth,
of course,
fucked.
Yeah.
That's why you can keep growing again to a point, but if your depth is quite low, but your growth gets,
it will crumble.
It'll all crumble.
Yeah.
And it might not crumble financially, but it'll crumble in other areas of life. Gambling's an interesting one.
Gambling.
I find it very fascinating. Thank God I've never got hooked on it. But
Me neither.
And it's much more common now that in preparation for this episode, that I've asked a lot of people about vices and what are their things, and it's popped up a lot. Yeah, it's one of those ones, I think, because it's not one of mine. You discount how common it is, and I think I know it's a friggin' horrific vice and addiction, because it's one of those things you can lose the whole lot dead sober.
Yep.
Like that. And it's interesting because so much of it is like counterintuitive to what you think. The addict gambler's brain, for example, they've done studies that, for example, when like a regular person goes and gambles, they win, they get a dopamine spike. Mm-hmm. When they lose, they don't. When an addicted gambler wins, they get a dopamine spike. When they lose, they get a dopamine spike. So it's crazy.
Yeah.
So they value uncertainty more than winning.
Yep.
Which is completely ridiculous.
So they get a bigger hit from loss. They chase the loss.
No, they would rather, like, in terms of an addicted gambler would rather have worse odds but uncertainty.
Yep.
Than high odds and just win. Because for them, when winning is equal to losing, that's more exciting than when winning is greater odds than losing, which is insane. And there's not many games that allow you to have where winnings are a greater percentage of losing. So, and it's things like, the predictability is just boring, and they don't want that. They're like deeply addicted gamblers from what I've looked at, and based on like some research, it's actually losing is more what they're going for, which is so counterintuitive. It's just crazy for someone like logically who's not involved in that world. And you've heard of like chasing losses?
Yes.
Yeah. So how it's more, they're in this state, obviously, when you're gambling, there's a wild increase with dopamine, and that increases your learning capacity. And like, they get that dopamine when they win, they lose. And if there's that random intermittent reward, like if it's a predictable like, predictable reward, they're not going to get it. When it comes off like randomly, they might win 3 hands in a row, then lose 30 in a row, and then win one. You know what I mean? That's they want that. even if they're getting crushed, they want it. And if they're losing, they'll justify themselves that, I've got to get that money back. But they just want to stay in that state, because that state for them, it's everything. And then, if they're winning, what are they going to say? I'm winning, I'm going to stay here. So in the end, they just want to remain in that state, whether it's winning or losing.
Yep.
And what actually gets them coming back is actually loss.
It's such a unique.
It's
such
crazy.
A unique vibe.
It's crazy, and even because casinos and they're so smart with how they, how they work everything. Like, even you can create uncertainty in terms of, like, there's obviously the win, there's the loss. You can create uncertainty in games in terms of the length of play of the game. You can create uncertainty in terms of how much money you win, what the prize is. You can create uncertainty in lights and the sounds and all the things. So there's so many layers interwoven within that. It's not just winning and losing, so they can get you hooked. And that's why, like, people in pokies, all those things are at play. Random intimate reward, lights.
It creates such an environment and experience that it's very hard to. And
there's buttons that you can press to control, like when you want to stop, and also it almost gives you this illusion of control, which you don't have any control. Yeah, and like there's things like near losses, which like a near loss is a loss. If you do a multi-bet and you get 5 of the 6, you lost. But what does the brain think?
I'm winning.
I was that close. So what's going to happen? I'm going to keep going. Yeah. I'm going to keep coming back. You do a lotto and you miss it by 1 or 2 numbers. What's the brain think? Fuck, almost won 20 mil. I'm going to come playing. Yeah. So it's like the wiring is also counterintuitive, but it's really like that state that they're looking for. And they did study that 1 in 4 severely addicted gamblers actually commit suicide.
I feel it's one of the most damaging vices that someone get addicted to. 100%. Mm-hmm. I remember, like, growing up in Greece, and especially in Greece in the 90s when I was, on my teenage years. I remember because in Greece back then, most people had money. It was the best decade in Greece.
In the 90s?
In the 90s. 90s, I was fortunate enough to grow up when Greece was literally at its best.
Did people used to work back in Greece back then?
They did, but because there was abundance and people had money, it was such a different environment. It was actually one of the countries that people were seeking to go, even not just holidays, but even
relocate their life.
Yeah, because it was such an amazing place back then. Before we went to Europe, and I remember, like, as a young kid, the amount of stories that I've heard from family members, from friends, from from people around us, even from my dad, like that he shared with me. And I had a couple of friends that their dads actually lost everything. The amount of stories, it was wild. And especially with pokies and playing cards and all the stuff, it was wild.
It's funny how different cultures are more susceptible to it as well.
Yeah.
A lot of Asian cultures, it's massive.
Yeah. And I even remember in Greece, you would go to, we call them cafenio, in Greece and other countries in Europe, and you would see people gambling in everything, even playing backgammon, all sorts of things, whatever they could get their hands on.
Well, that's more addictive.
Yeah.
Because the less you understand it, the more uncertainty.
Yeah.
That just goes back to what we were saying. It just creates. There's so much more intermittent reward, and if you don't understand something, they'll bet on anything.
It will keep you going. Yeah.
And a proper addicted to gamble will gamble on anything. They don't a lot of them will have. I think some people gamble and they're whatever they might be. I don't know, it's a hard one. Most people don't win over time, but you'll get the couple of freaks. But people
definitely.
who they do it over a whole range of things. They're just seeking that.
Yeah, so
that state.
Definitely. So I knew from back then I cannot engage with that straight away. It's a no.
They don't have balconies on Vegas because of that.
Really?
Yeah. A lot of people be jumping off Caesar's Palace, man. Yeah, so they don't have balconies.
Vegas is an interesting place.
It is an interesting place. I need to go this year. So, in terms of really, we've spoken a lot about addiction, what it is, the process of dopamine, relevant, a couple of vices, and gone to some depth there. I guess from here, people will start to get a fundamental understanding of those things. Management's got to start with self-awareness.
Yeah, definitely.
Because if you don't have self-awareness, nothing's happening.
You can't progress at all.
If you got your missus telling you got to sort this out, this is a problem, you're watching too much, Netflix, you're overworking, you're doing this, you're doing that, and if you don't think it's a problem, nothing else matters.
You have to start from that and take responsibility, obviously, because you cannot do any of the other steps unless there is the awareness.
Absolutely.
Or, it actually has a negative effect on my life.
A thing in terms of particularly for resetting dopamine is like a 30-day dopamine detox.
Dopamine fast. Yeah.
Dopamine fast, same thing. So often people during that period, there's different variations of it as well, but they'll have to engage in activities that obviously cut dopamine as much as they can and manage that. And generally the first 2 weeks are always going to be the hardest.
Withdrawal symptoms,
the
deficit and everything.
Yeah. And you can even, they've done imaging studies that you'll still be in a dopamine deficit. You can be at 2 weeks as well. So that's where that adds to all you feel like shit, the urges are pretty bad. And
especially for people that they have done like hard drugs, they've engaged with certain vices that they really spike that dopamine, and they have done it chronically. It's very, very hard. Because the brain has altered so much.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
And I think with this sort of stuff, it's more for mild to moderate addiction. Not severe addictions are different. It's a different ball game. And
good luck with that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's very complicated. And by week 3, generally people will start to feel a lot better. So the first 2 weeks are always going to be the hardest. By week 3, they'll feel better. By the end of week 4, generally after 30 days, your dopamine levels should be reset in a mild to moderate addiction, not a severe addiction. A big thing I think is very important is telling the truth. And that's not, and a lot of people who have vices and addictions, we all do it, they lie about stuff.
Yeah. And you have to tell the truth to yourself first. This is the hardest part, to recognize it yourself and actually stop hiding. Because you're not going to be able to tell the truth to someone else so you can seek the support afterwards, receive the support, unless you actually say the truth to yourself.
Definitely.
It's very, very important.
And not just the truth about that vice, just in general. Because that affects the connections in the prefrontal cortex as well, between the limbic system, which is the emotional brain, and the reward system. So these get disconnected in people who are lying a lot.
Massively.
So it's crazy that even just telling the truth over time will start to reconnect the limbic system, the prefrontal cortex, and the reward system. So it actually neurologically strengthens things.
The pathways, yeah.
Then you have pro-social and more destructive shame. So what that is, like pro-social shame is having a group of people, for example, you might be accountable for. And you have an issue. And then, but you actually tell the truth with them, whether it's your mates or...
And there's compassion involved.
Correct.
Also.
Correct. And at least in that process, you're still telling truth. And then you have people that hold you accountable. There's compassion, as opposed to destructive shame is just... doing this one, having no accountability, lying, dropping into that shame cycle even more. I think it's hard. This is really hard these days. But if someone can abstain from a lot of these addictions and vices up until 21, it helps, because a lot of neurological development, by the time you hit 21, it starts to be fairly stable. And that was something I'm just so fortunate in my life. I didn't get into, sex. I didn't get into drugs. I didn't get into alcohol, stimulants. I didn't get into virtually, there was no workaholism. There was almost nothing up until 2021. So I was fortunate.
That's pretty,
I was really lucky.
Late.
And obviously phones when we were young, we're like 30. So phones, I think when I was 17.
We had these massive Motorola's.
Yeah. And in my school, I mean,
where do I carry it?
The first phone was about $2,000.
Yeah.
And it was literally like the old Nokia. And it would be able to play Snake, and if a kid had it at school, everyone would be all over him. So, and we were very fortunate. We didn't, phones weren't advanced. So many things. If you could get away with not getting into drugs and alcohol
pretty early,
pretty early, you're generally not too bad. So that's something as well for people, particularly for it's hard, for parents, and really supporting their kids and being aware of all this sort of stuff, is knowing that neurological development is massive, definitely the first 3 years.
Definitely.
And they've got to really support their kids in the first 3 years, not just give them even if they're stressed and it's inconvenient, not just give them a phone or anything like that, because that will start to affect their development hugely.
And their ability to focus also. This is one thing that it's also overlooked. When kids engage also with screens like from such a young age, and there's the scrolling and everything else, it actually affects your ability to focus also at the same time.
Definitely. Boredom. Embracing boredom. And being comfortable with boredom.
Embracing the present moment.
Yes.
That's how I should call it.
And embracing pain.
Yeah.
That's the thing, like embracing boredom, what comes up, embracing pain, not running away from it, not numbing it, leaning into it, what comes up. As you said, hormesis, explain that.
Yeah, so with a hormetic response, it's essentially a self-induced stressors that we put ourselves into consciously, which basically have a positive effect on the physiology and psychology. So essentially, like an ice bath, as you have here on the room, it's actually creates a hormetic response. So essentially, you're going towards pain because it's something you definitely don't want to do. Going inside the water that it's 3 degrees, and basically after 5 seconds you feel all this pain on your extremities. It's not something that you will chase. No. That discomfort. But engaging with that and allowing yourself to, especially when you go past the first 1 minute, all of a sudden, like your nervous system, like you can actually sit inside the cold water and you stay in a present state through discomfort. That has a massive impact, especially the ice bath on your dopamine also. It creates a massive dopamine upregulation. But also it helps also with a pain-pleasure balance at the same time. And
that's really probably only applicable for like mild to moderate noxious stimuli, not severe.
Not severe.
Not severe. So mild to moderate, like sauna, ice bath, and the same thing. Because if you went to severe, if you went into an ice bath, 0 degrees for half an hour, you're done. You're done. Or you did a sauna for hours and hours, you're done. So it's like mild to moderate.
Stressors over a period of time that progressively, because it allows also the nervous system to regulate, and it helps you to create a more robust nervous system, but at the same time it creates resilience, which is very, very important. So your capacity to deal with stress, your window of tolerance also changes. There's a lot of positive effect, especially from practices like that. Another thing is also something that we've done also together, which came up previously as we were conversating. It was actually like when we did Cambo. That's another actually hormetic response. Remember that practice like with the medicine, which is essentially like you are getting burned in the skin superficially by a stick, and essentially the practitioner applies a venom from a frog from the Amazon, and essentially what it does, it goes through your lymphatic system, through your heart, and it pumps it everywhere, and it's such an uncomfortable feeling that you have to sit in discomfort. There's heat everywhere, all sorts of experiencing swelling and all the stuff.
Like a madman for 45
minutes. It's not something that you would seek to consciously do. No. But essentially, like having an experience like that, it has massive health benefits. And even science is catching up on that. They actually started doing studies and everything. So there's a multitude of ways that you can explore that. Some more intense, some less intense.
And there's so many different things, as you said.
Of course.
And I think that goes into my next point in terms of earning dopamine. If dopamine, you can get it too easily, lean away from it. You should be able to like minimize easy access to dopamine, try and earn your dopamine, which things like hormetic responses are a way of doing that. Developing generative habits. I think that's really like looking at what you're doing when you're doing porn on your phone, if you're watching Netflix all the time, whether you're eating food and create a better routine. If you need to hang around different people, create more excitement in your life. I think a lot of what happens is because people are bored. For example, it's like I do jiu-jitsu. I've been doing it for 10 years. It's like do something like jiu-jitsu. You know what I mean? Like you get out of your head.
Of course.
Like, you know what I mean? You get out of your head, or some form of hard
training,
learn a new
or some skill,
or boxing, or
you're around other men. There's so much. No,
definitely. And like, good sleep routine, like generative habits in terms of, not looking at your phone at night. First thing in the morning, people you hang around, all these different, like from your eating habits to all those sort of things. And there's a whole heap of different, there's no right or wrong, but it's sort of what works and develop, more productive as opposed to empty dopamine calories.
Making better decisions.
Definitely.
Like what came up for me, it's actually something really recent that I've experienced with my partner, Rebecca. So we had a period of time that we used to, especially now moving in a new house, we would cook and go straight to the TV afterwards. We're tired, like going through a lot of stuff, and we go straight to the TV, just lay there, watch TV, and then go to bed. And all of a sudden, like after becoming conscious of that and the impact that it has, because a lot of people, they think, I'm watching TV with my partner, I'm actually spending time with my partner. That's not the reality, because your attention is actually on what you're watching. So you're not really connecting with your partner. And we replace that, this is where making better decisions is very, very important. We replace that with actually sitting on the table that we have on the dinner table after eating food and actually connecting with each other and going through what we are facing, what is present, what we need to deal with, like all sorts of things, like making plans. And all of a sudden, even on the first week, not watching TV and just spending time together, our relationship became even closer. And I'm like, I've actually never realized that.
And so simple.
Such a simple thing. Such a simple thing. That's why presence is so important. Being present with your food and with your partner and actually allowing yourself to spend quality time instead of just going and laying down and wasting some time on that.
And all these vices essentially taking your presence away from you.
Essentially, yeah. That's a thing.
It's a thing I think's quite interesting is when things are going really well with someone and then they relapse.
Yeah.
And I imagine it'd be very frustrating for the people around them, especially when someone's really suffering and they've worked through something. I've done this myself, where I guess, sex, women, alcohol, drugs, that was a problem for 15 years.
Yep.
And once I started doing work on myself, when I was in Perth, I was great for like a year and a half and, wasn't engaging in activities and really thought I hit a corner. And then, then I went overseas and like I got put into basically I wasn't managing myself leading up to the trip. I was like killing myself with work and different things and just a little bit of mismanaging myself. And then one night I fell straight back into the old way and then went through a whole process of like shame and guilt and all these sort of things. And I thought, fuck, I thought I was like beyond that. You know what I mean? And then
your ego thought that.
Yeah. But like a lot of it was, obviously different environment. Yep. And what happens,
it was not a different environment.
But I'll leave it there. It's like I didn't keep the hypervigilant state.
Yep.
So in my mind, what I told myself was, when I'm here, but this is how I conduct myself here. But then going away, I dropped the ball. And didn't keep that.
So you give permission to yourself to...
Yeah, correct. Because that's something I did on holidays and going overseas for years and years and years, had these wild stories and, and there was the old encoded memories from, obviously years of like just those sort of stories that, and then when I dropped the ball and didn't manage myself correctly, boom. Yeah, so it's just, I think being hypervigilant is a very important thing when things are good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and keeping and not getting... I say it to my chiropractic clients that come in, like they come in originally, they'll be a shit show in terms of things aren't good. They get to a level after a while, they're generally pretty good. It's like, you got to keep on to it. You can't get cocky and think, oh, I'm all good, I'm all fixed, I'm sorted. And then you start slowly slipping back in old ways. So that's something that, even when things are good, be always hypervigilant with it. There's something called self-binding. Mm-hmm. So there's 3 types. There's physical, chronological, and categorical. So what physical self-binding is, for example, say if you have a food problem, it's hiding your food somewhere. Or like an alcohol problem, you put your liquor somewhere where you can't get it. Same thing, weed, coke, whatever it is. It's creating like a physical barrier. Or, for example, you might take, if food's a problem, you might take medication to suppress your hunger. So this is a vehicle, but it never gets to the root cause of going. So it's not as successful. Then the second type of self-binding is chronological. That's, for example, an example where someone might go, look, I only drink on weekends. So it's obviously, or I only have pizza and burger on a Sunday night. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And that's much, because at least you're delaying gratification, so that helps with the prefrontal cortex. So that's a better tool. then obviously engaging.
To manage,
engaging midweek. So, and the other one's categorical. So what that is like basically you pick and choose your vices. So that can be good as well. Because for some people, that might be going, okay, I'm going to really restrict myself with, porn and stimulants. And I'm going to be mindful. I'm not going to overexert myself with work. So there's 3 different ways that people can do to manage it when we're talking about overall management. So we went through a lot, like from addiction to dopamine to different vices to management. So I think the 3 things to really take home from this is behind every vice, there's an emotion.
Mm-hmm. There's definitely something unresolved.
There's unresolved.
Like trauma, emotion from trauma, and in general is discomfort. Yeah.
The second thing is dopamine runs the show. And now that you can understand how dopamine works, you don't get played by it. Use it for your advantage, don't get used by it. And the third thing is accountability and the right environment is essential, and I guess awareness essential for management.
Yes, definitely.
It's been good, Theo.
Well, it's good to be back, and I've actually missed the environment and having conversations. So
me too.
Yeah.
On to the next one. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Cheers, bro.
Thank you, bro.
What we're looking to do at the Blokes app is really help empower men and create content that they get enormous value. So I get so many guys tell me how good the content is. They get so much value, yet still so many of you aren't subscribing. So if you can do us a massive favor, subscribe to the channel. If there's other people you know would benefit, let them know what we're doing. It's early days. We're getting bigger and better. And the reward for you, the bigger we get this channel, the better the guests, the more frequent we're going to do content, and you're going to win.